Hello everyone, it's Triple Z Hacker, and I am back with another Shogun 2 guide video for you all. In this video, I will be covering everything about multiplayer retainers. This video is going to be a bit of a lengthy one in terms of just a guide. I'm going to try to condense it down as much as I can. I've split the video up into chapters though, so feel free to navigate and skip around at your leisure. And I hope you find everything I say to be very informative and that you enjoy the video. Lastly, I'll say be sure to subscribe for more Shogun 2 and Total War content. Alright, so let's begin with a general overview on retainers and my just overall tips on which retainers to use and things like that. I want to say that this will also probably cover a lot of things most of you already know, so feel free to skip ahead to the other sections of the video. Now, for retainers themselves, I figure the best way to talk about them is basically to see what Shogun 2 says about them. So, retainers grant bonuses on the battlefield and are gained by completing armor sets, unlocking achievements, and conquering provinces on the avatar progression map. They can also be unlocked through the DLC content, and as you get more available retainers and unlock retainers, you start to see there are a lot of retainers to choose from. Now, in this instance, I have unlocked all the retainers for Shogun 2. At the start, when you create a new avatar, you don't really have all these retainers unlocked, so keep that in mind. But of course, as you win battles on different provinces on the campaign map, you unlock retainers, and you can also get retainers through achievements and also random drops. Now, when it comes to how many retainers you can use for each battle, the maximum number is 5 and the minimum number is 2, because when you create a new avatar, you start with 2 slots in your active set. You get a third when you reach level 4, you get a fourth when you reach level 7, and a fifth when you reach level 10. I'm currently level 10 silver, so I have all 5 unlocked. Now, when it comes to the different types of retainers, there are a ton of different categories. You can see here in the filters, you can base it off unit class, weapon type, effects, and even there's others, special retainer effects for specific retainers. I would love to do a video breaking down each retainer in depth, but sadly that would be such a long video. So instead, I've just decided to just provide you all with some general tips on the retainers I use at times and sort of rules to follow when using retainers that are typically advantageous for you. Again, the difficult thing about judging retainers is that it largely depends on your play style. It depends on what your opponent brings, which map you find yourself going to in matchmaking. So there's a lot of factors, and there's not really one super good retainer. There are certainly retainers that are broken, but we're talking about combinations of retainers here. So we want to find really good combinations to use together that coordinate really well. Now, I want you guys to kind of ignore all these filters up here, and instead I'll try to provide you guys with a better way of organizing retainers. So I like to think of retainers in a little less categories than what the filters have up here. Typically, I tend to think of retainers as positive buffs, such as like Blade Master here, so it gives a buff to your army. Then you have negative buffs, such as Bad Omen here, so that affects your opponent's army. You then have retainers that give specialized uses, like Geisha Poisoner here. So, but this is also kind of considered a negative buff, so another really good example of that might be something like Metsuke Inspector, which kind of has a bit of a negative effect as well. But those are sort of like, specialized ones. And then you have, of course, the retainers that grant you units. So if we can find like Ox Carts here, grants you a siege unit. Or, for instance, Shogun's Emissary grants Great Guard use, and there are others such as that. And then lastly, of course, you have the legendary retainers here, which all kind of grant unique abilities, and they're usually just positive, but you can see based off the arrows if they're green or, red, positive or negative. So keep that in mind when choosing retainers as well. Now, the overall advice I have to say when choosing retainers, after, the overview we did, is that I choose retainers, as I mentioned earlier, that benefit your style of play and army compositions, and you usually want to choose positive retainers. The reason for that is because if you choose something like Blade Master, as long as you bring sword infantry in your army, you're going to get that bonus regardless. And The other aspect to that is that if I bring a negative retainer such as Bandit Horse Thieves, so which is a pretty decent retainer, the only problem is that if my opponent doesn't bring any cav, which typically they do, but let's say in this instance they don't, then this retainer is just wasted. It doesn't really go into any use. So you would be better off just getting European Horse Trader, for instance, or possibly going for practice grounds here for your cav. So keep that in mind. Now, I will go over some negative retainers, though, and sort of why they're beneficial, too. The next thing I want to say in regards to just overall tips for retainer, and this is overall tip number 2, is that choose retainers that affect the majority of your army or as much of your army as possible. So, for instance, if you get something such as Famous Armory here, it's really good because it grants armor to all melee infantry. And if you bring a lot of melee infantry, then you get a lot of armor bonuses for all of them. Now, if you bring something like European Gunsmith, though, and then you don't have any matchlock units, you get kind of the point. And even if you have like one matchlock unit, it's not really worth it to bring European Gunsmith. You'd be better off getting something that affects a wider range of your army. But these are generally just easy tips to follow. The next thing I will say is that the two really good retainers that I recommend bringing as many times as possible is Trade Post here, or Trading Post. And then you want to bring Inspiring Orator as well, if I can find it on this list. Here we go. So these reduce the recruitment cost. So the Trading Post reduces recruitment cost for all units, -4%, and Inspiring Orator is -10% for Ashigaru units. So I recommend getting these two, as you want to bring as many units as possible, and you want to bring your veteran units, and you want to make their cost as low as possible. So definitely try to get these two retainers. They're both found on the avatar progression map, so don't worry about having to like buy DLC or anything. They're in the base game, so definitely aim for bringing these two retainers when possible. Now, the other tips I want to say too is that you want to bring, as I mentioned, retainers that coordinate well with one another. So for instance, you can bring something like Blade Master, and if you want to bring a negative retainer and be really, bold, I guess, against your opponent, you could bring something like Untrained Fukukook, if I can find it. There we go. Or Fukukook. I apologize. My pronunciations of Japanese words will be atrocious. But this is -2 melee attack to all enemy sword infantry, and so you can see it's a 4-point swing, because +2 and -2. So that's an example where some retainers work really well with one another. Another good example, though, and one that I think is better, is if you bring Blade Master and something like Military Storehouse or Famous Armory, or ones that affect a lot of units. So this, of course, increase fatigue resistance, which is nice. Another really good retainer to go with Blade Master 2 is actually, if you have the DLC, Reneo's Teachings is pretty good, because it increases melee defense and morale. It lowers melee attack slightly, but you still get +1 melee attack. Of course, you also have the other sword retainer, which is for Yayu sword instructor here. So again, just get +3 for sword infantry. So if you bring like a katana core, for instance, stuff like that. The next thing I want to talk about, of course, is going to those negative retainers and kind of exactly what works with them. Now, if you play a familiar opponent, or you play someone who you've encountered on matchmaking and things like that, you can kind of anticipate what they're going to bring, in which case you can bring negative retainers. Like if you know someone loves Cav, then you can bring Bandit Horse Thieves. If you know someone loves Matchlocks, you can bring Camp Sickness or Damp Powder, for instance. It's a risk, but it's a good chance that they will probably emulate the army that they use to beat you, or that they typically use all the time. Now, some really good guaranteed negative retainers, though, are ones like Metsuke Inspector, the sort of the rally ability, causing -1 enemy morale is really helpful, especially on the small battles, too, and especially if you have the Shrine, and if you have like scare enemy bonuses for your sword units or even your cav. It's overall a pretty good retainer. It's not fun when it gets used against you, and it can be countered with Geisha Poisoner, so be careful about bringing it too often. The other one that's generally a good pick is actually Bad Omen, and this actually works on the very low levels, like the smaller battles that you face when you're like level 1 through 3. And it also works on the higher levels too, when your avatar starts costing a lot of money and you sort of have to create armies with a lot of really elite Ashigaru units at times. And sometimes this can be really good against a meta army, and I'll describe that later on in the chapters. But those are some examples of really, really good negative retainers. The last thing I'll say when it comes to pretty much overall tips is that it's trial and error. Typically, it's going to take time to figure out which retainers you like, which you want to use. You also have to unlock them over time. So generally, just try to use different retainer combinations and see which one works. The last thing I'll mention with this general just tips and everything is that in the video description, I have a Steam mod listed for unlocking all the retainer slots for this game. So feel free to take advantage of that. I know it could be seen as cheating or whatever, but the game is so old. A bunch of people have already been hacking it and things like that. And Avatar Conquest, can be somewhat a bit of a toxic affair at times. So feel free to take advantage of that. And if you want to grind it out and try to, of course, unlock all the retainers on your own, feel free to do so. But some of the legendary retainers and stuff like that are just impossible to get without completing achievements or, just from random drops. So keep that in mind. Anyways, now we're going on to the next section in this video where I talk about sort of retainer combinations and talk more about army composition and which retainers work well with each army that you bring. For the retainer combinations and army compositions section of the video, basically we're going to follow sort of some of the principles I outlined when it comes to my advice on choosing retainers. And it's pretty straightforward. You want to choose retainers that complement the army that you bring. So the units that you bring, what veteran units you have, and how you upgrade them. So for starters, I'll create an army composition with some of my veterans, for instance, or maybe just a random army composition here. But typically, I going with the Yari Samurai, bring a Naginata Samurai front line, bring maybe like 1 or 2 monks, maybe like 4 monks. So this will be like one of my armies I sometimes bring. Then I'll bring like 3 Yari Cav, and then we'll throw on like, let's say, one of my Fire Cav units, and then maybe we could throw on some mounted gunners here if I can find them. As an example, we got some like leftover funds, for instance, like you throw on a bow samurai, or maybe even throw on just like 1 matchlock unit as an example. And of course, I'm not using the exact army compositions, but you get what I'm the sense of kind of the army composition I have. Now for the retainers, what I would probably do then, since we have some cav, would probably get the lightweight Gunjigura war saddle, if not the European horse trader. Of course, we would probably throw on World Weary. This is just an elite retainer. It's impossible to get because you would have to get a random drop, but typically most of the elite players run this retainer, or if anything, they don't, but they usually get it played against them. Because at the higher levels, most people have retainers, or they've been playing the game so long, or other things like that. Of course, I do have in the video description a mod on the Steam Workshop that enables all retainers to be unlocked. So definitely take advantage of that. But yeah, World Weary is definitely a very broken retainer to use. Another thing I would get here is I would probably get practice grounds for the cav, because I would be relying on them to do a lot. I would get trading posts as well. And then the last thing I probably would get would be the Mikoshi portable shrine for my monks. Maybe toss out the war saddle for something like Reneo's teachings for the melee defense. So there's an example of a retainer grouping. Now, another combination that seems a bit more simple, we could get rid of this army composition real quickly and instead just bring a standard army composition. First thing before we add any units, probably throw on trading post. Let's get Blade Master. We'll get practice grounds, and then we'll add to it. Where is it? Yari Master, for instance. It's always a decent retainer to have for your spears. And another retainer we could get is Inspiring Orator. So this is also a pretty good basic set or basic template to use for retainers. So with these retainers, the army composition we'd bring would probably be something along the lines of getting like some long Yari Ashigaru. You could obviously get a katana core going here, maybe just 2 elite katanas, and then possibly throw on, you know, just a couple of cheap katanas as well, or lower ranked katanas, lesser ranked, I should say. Typically, I usually always get a Yari Samurai because the rapid advance is so good. I like just running 1 Daikyu Samurai, but you could also just get a Bow Samurai as well. On top of it, you could also get a few Naginatas, even though we don't really have any bonuses to Naginatas. So instead, we would probably get some Yari Ashigaru here as well. Maybe throw on 1 or 2 more lead Ashigaru, and then we have the Cav, so we get like the Fire Cav, and then you probably get some Yari Cav here, relatively cheaper Yari Cav too. Preferably, you know, 3 to 4 units. Throw on like an extra light Cav for good measure. So 4 Cav units, you know, you got 4 swords, you got 4 spears, you got some bows. You can throw on another thing I always like to get to is some like Naginata attendants as well, just as anti-cav, for instance. So you can like throw on 2 Naginata attendants or something, and maybe we'll get like a more expensive light cav unit, for instance. So, or maybe you can even just get a regular Yari cav as well. Oh no, we don't have enough money for that. Close, we were close, but yeah, you can get like one of my beefed light cav, and then throw on like another, like a sword attendant or something. You know, sometimes you use attendants if you have the DLC for the armies. But anyways, so this would be like a good combination of retainers there. Maybe you get like regular Ashigaru for these. Another army composition and everything, of course, is like the katana core. So this involves, you know, getting like 5 to 6 katana samurai per se, or something along those lines. So I'll just create this, but you know, let's say like 7 katana samurai. I know it's like a crazy number. You get like maybe 2 Yari Samurai here, and then you get like a Bow Samurai, and then on top of it you get maybe 3 to 4 Yari Cav, some light Cav as well, so maybe 5 units of Cav, and then you got like some extra Ashigaru as well as like fodder, and then maybe like throw on like some Matchlock Warrior Monks or something like that. Now for like an army composition like this that's relatively balanced, this works, but here, you know, maybe you wouldn't focus on the Yari Master, and instead you would get something like Infantry Officer, or maybe even you would get the Yagagu Sword Instructor here for the melee attacks. So those are just other examples, maybe even Famous Armory too. But that's like another way to set up possibly an army such as this. Or maybe you get Bandit Horse Thieves as well, since you have less spears. So there's generally it's pretty standard exactly kind of what units you use. Now let's get sort of the meta army. So this is the meta army, for instance, and of course some of these units are upgraded and everything like that, but a meta army would consist of maybe 2 Matchlock Samurai, some Matchlock Warrior Monks. Then on top of that you would have like 3 really heavily upgraded Yari Ashigaru. Then you would either have 3 Lone Swords, sorry there, or you would have like 3 Nodachis. For this purpose we'll just use Nodachis as an example here. And then for the Cav you would have like 2 Yari Cav, and then you would have some Fire Cav, and then you would have mounted gunners, and on top of that maybe you would throw on, say, some Naginata attendants. Maybe even if you have like a little extra leftover funds, you would throw on, say, maybe another Nodachi, just to have 4 Nodachi. So I know the funds doesn't really exactly equal what the units are bringing, because imagine these are all upgraded veterans, right? Well, for something like this army, so a gun army, you would typically bring something like Inspiring Orator to decrease the cost of the Ashigaru. You would definitely bring Blade Master for the swords, defending the Ashigaru, you know, from behind. You would probably get something like Practice Grounds for your Cav. If not, you would also get the lightweight saddle for your Donderbus or mounted gunners to be able to maneuver and micro them efficiently. And then following that, you'd probably throw on something like World Weary to discourage, and sorry, I just misclicked there, to discourage your opponent's veteran units. And the last retainer, you'd probably get Trading Post, just to be able to afford it all. And this is just an example of a pretty like elite use of retainers. You'd maybe throw off the lightweight saddle to maybe get like something like European Gunsmith for your guns, or you could also get something like Supply Wagon as an example if I can find it. I brought it earlier, but just for the there it is, just for the matchlocks as well. And actually, I think the meta army is missing something actually. So instead of these two units, you would have bows. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. So this would be something like the meta army. You would have Daikyu samurai or bow warrior monks or something to outrange and protect your matchlocks from your opponent's archers. So that's kind of the that's kind of the meta army you would have, something similar to like this, where you have like 4 to 5 units of cav, you got some Yari Ashigaru, you got a front line of matchlocks, you got swords, defending the rear, possibly to mount an offensive, and then you got, of course, the mounted gun cav to be able to micro around and kill units that are isolated from the rest of their army, and then you got like extra fodder units that you can use against your opponents. So that's an example of the meta army, and those are some examples of maybe retainer combinations. Once again, you can kind of get really creative with these, but you don't want to get too creative. There's a lot of retainers that just aren't worth using. A lot of the legendary retainers, for instance, just aren't beneficial. I mean, Mempo Mask kind of works, but kind of doesn't. Unfortunately, Heavenly Banner does not work at all. So those are just things to keep in mind. And of course, like Expert Gun Instructor is really good for matchlocks because the reload skill, you don't really need the accuracy for matchlocks since they kind of just kill everything after 2 volleys. Once again, you can bring like retainers such as like Ox Carts or Shogun's Emissary or even Ninja Dawn for certain units to enable like Ninja's siege units or Great Guard. And those retainers are fine, but you want to have them you want to be able to have 5 slots so that way, you're able to get like that 5th slot as the unlocking retainer, because if you have only 3 to 2 slots or whatever and you're choosing like Shogun's Emissary, it's just not going to be worth it in the long run. Anyways, that's all I have on this section of the video. I hope you guys enjoy the next section, which I'm going to be going over how retainers relate to veteran units in Shogun 2. The last thing I want to mention in regards to retainers is how they correlate to veteran units. So most of you already know what veteran units are, but for those who don't, they're units you grant veteran status, and then you can allocate a certain amount of skill points to upgrade them accordingly. Now, the stats relate to your retainers as well, and pretty much one of the things you want to keep in mind is that you want to choose retainers that work well with how you upgrade your veterans. So if you have Katana Samurai who already have, let's say, an armor upgrade, well then you don't need Famous Armory, for instance, because you already have the upgraded armor. Instead, you would choose something, as I mentioned earlier, like Infantry Officer works well, or maybe even something like Military Storehouse, for instance, for the fatigue resistance and the stamina for the Katana Samurai. Now that, of course, applies to all units, so just something to keep in mind and be aware of when using retainers. Now that is all I have for my retainer guide, so I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you have any more feedback or questions on retainers, be sure to leave a comment. Thank you once again, though, for watching the video, and be sure to like and subscribe for more Shogun 2 content.